Hi, everyone, and welcome to the ANAW-USA One Health Conversation Series. I'm the host, Katherine Baxter. Thanks for tuning in to episode 3, where we'll be speaking with Dr. Maryanne Kagai and Dr. Liz Whitney about their unique experiences as veterinarians in Kenya and the United States, the different challenges facing veterinarians around the world, the role of compassion in veterinary care and conservation efforts, and the importance of connecting the dots between human, animal, and environmental health. So our first guest, Dr. Maryanne Kugai, is a veterinarian and has served as the programs manager for the African Network for Animal Welfare in Kenya. She's also a member of the Kenya Veterinary Board, Kenya Veterinary Association, and the Kenya Women Veterinary Association. She graduated from the University of Nairobi, College of Agriculture and Veterinary Sciences. And Dr. Kagai has been an advocate for rabies eradication as a member of the National Rabies Elimination Coordination Committee in Kenya, and was nominated for the Global Rabies Alliance Control Award in 2017. She currently works with companion animals in Kenya's private sector. Our second guest, Dr. Elizabeth Whitney, is also a veterinarian and serves on ANAW-USA's board as secretary. She graduated from Colorado State University College of Veterinary Medicine in 1986. Over the span of her 35-year career, she has practiced small animal medicine for 24 years, worked in veterinary marketing and technical support for 8 years, taught small animal nursing in the veterinary technology program at Front Range Community College, and provided temporary clinical support at CSU Community Practice. She's also served in an advisory capacity on veterinary educational boards, along with serving in leadership roles at local, state, and national levels. She is an avid and frequent volunteer, serving on a nonprofit board supporting youth in the arts. And in the past 4 years, she's traveled to Mexico, Puerto Rico, the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, and Kenya, participating in veterinary service trips that perform pre-vaccination and spay and neuter services for local communities. Well, quite impressive biographies there for both of you, and just want to thank you both so much for joining us today and allow you to say hello and introduce yourselves.
Nice to see you, Maryanne.
Nice to see you too, Liz.
Excellent. Well, just to jump right in, we like to begin with a few questions that help our listeners get to know our guests. So to start off, I'm just wondering, what was your spark or the inspiration that led you down your career path as a veterinarian? And maybe, Liz, you can start us off.
Okay. Mine, it wasn't like I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was a child or even in my teens, but I grew up with a dad who really loved animals, and so we always had dogs and cats and horses, and both my uncles were into horses and my grandmother was into horses. And I hate to say, but we did keep a few pets that probably we shouldn't have had, like wild creatures. But that, I think, really solidified, my love of animals. And when I was in my teens and floundering a bit, my dad was always one of those people who encouraged me to have a passion for something or, find something I was enthusiastic about. And in his case, it was flying. And even though he didn't have a college degree, I think he just really wanted me to work in something that would not only keep me busy and out of trouble, but also something that I would enjoy. So I started working for veterinarians early on in my late teens, and I worked for a dog kennel in my mid-teens. And so it just kind of evolved from there with mentorship along the way from my bosses and other people that I encountered along the path.
I didn't know that about you, Liz. And actually, I should say that Liz and I have known each other most of my life because she and my mom co-owned a veterinary practice together. So it's interesting to hear what started you off down that path. What about yourself, Maryanne?
Mine is quite similar to Liz's, actually, because I can trace my inspiration back to my childhood. Both my parents were teachers, very strict, and they had 8-to-5 jobs, so they were always busy. But despite that, we kept a variety of animals. So we grew up surrounded by animals. We had poultry, we had cattle, we had pigs, we had goats, and we had dogs, 7 dogs to be precise.
Wow.
And so we were actively involved in the feeding and cleaning of all the animals. And there was really no dull moment at home. And I enjoyed watching my parents recycle everything in the farm. The manure from the animals, they used to fertilize the soil and to get fodder for the cows and for the goats. They planted maize and they got that to feed the poultry. We got fresh vegetables for our daily use. So it always marveled me. And I was that little tiny girl that was always intrigued when I saw the vets coming to our home to do the routine vaccinations and deworming, and I would run to his car and pick the big vet kits, which was probably oversized, but hey, I just enjoyed it, carry it, and just watch him work. I think that really inspired me to go into vet medicine.
Yeah, it's funny how those memories, that the vivid memory of seeing the veterinarian pull up with the veterinary kit, and how those things kind of stick with you as you move through your life and career. And that kind of leads me into the next question, which I hope isn't redundant, but were there any particular experiences with animals or the natural world more broadly that had an impact and helped shape you as a person, not necessarily early on, at any point in life? Marianne, you want to go ahead?
Yes. So I had mentioned we had 7 dogs. So out of the 7 dogs, there's one particular dog called Casper. Now, Casper was named after a famous cartoon series called Casper the Friendly Ghost, because he was all white. But in this case, Casper was not really friendly. He was quite the contrary. He was an introvert. He enjoyed his own space, and he didn't like to be cuddled. He was always at the back of the pack doing his own thing. And there was this particular incident. He got injured on his leg, and I sat with him patiently, knowing that he doesn't like to be cuddled. I sat with him patiently and hoping that he would allow me to just tend to his wound. And I still remember the way he looked at me and how he stretched his leg towards me, so that it's like he knew that I was there to help him. And I tended to his wound, but that particular incident taught me at that tender age that animals, when injured, feel pain, just like human beings. And it taught me to be empathetic, to be patient, and to be nurturing.
That's beautiful. Yeah. He could tell you had good intentions. Liz, what about yourself?
I don't think I had a particular incident like Maryanne. However, over the years we had some, sick and injured pets, and we would occasionally visit the veterinarian or have them come out. And, back in the early days when I was being raised, sometimes we just kind of, did it ourselves too. I'll be honest about that. And we, like I said, I would probably say horses maybe did that for me, because in my, I was involved in 4-H, and we did, I had a mare and a foal. And so I would ride and do barrel racing and do halter and that kind of stuff. And I think spending time with the horses at the barn, was always a good thing. We didn't have our own place, but we boarded them. And so probably that, and just having, my uncles involved in the horse world. And that's probably the biggest thing. And my mom was never a huge pet lover. So my dad and I were the ones that would mostly take care of the family pet. In that case, we didn't have a lot of dogs like Dr. Maryanne, but we would have 1 or 2 at a time. And we had a few cats that were usually outdoor cats. And so over the years, I learned a lot more about caretaking of animals than I did as I was being raised. We kind of shot from the hip. I would say those experiences, just kind of animal husbandry and learning about them as we had them as pets.
Mm-hmm. I think that caretaking as well, it's the same kind of relationship, but in a different capacity as in veterinary medicine, right? And Liz, it's like we had the same childhoods, but mine was a little bit later on, horses and dogs and outdoor cats and running around. And I took it for granted. I think that was something that I'm aware of now, is that I took for granted having all these animals around me all the time, and how that kind of shaped my worldview and just my understanding of them as sentient, smart creatures who feel and who love. And anyway, It's interesting. Maybe now it would be great if we could talk a little bit about how each of you first became introduced to ANAW and how you got involved in their mission and supporting their work. Liz, would you like to start us off here?
Sure. I had never even heard of African Network for Animal Welfare until 2019 when I signed up to do a trip with Dr. Lisa McCarthy and her nonprofit VetTrex to come to Kenya and do a spay-neuter clinic. And I was in charge of the recovery section of the clinic. I've gotten pretty slow at surgery over the years, so I was not one of the fast surgeons. And actually, even until we arrived in Kenya, I didn't understand the relationship of ANAW in our experience. And so very quickly, I was made aware of that because they were with us everywhere and fantastic hosts. I feel like, at the time, David Geese, who is one of the founders of ANAW-USA, was on our trip. And we sat together a lot in the bus. And while we were riding in the bus, David and I got to know each other, and he invited me to consider a position on the board for ANAW-USA. And I did not make that commitment until after I was back from Kenya. But I was, very honored that he would think that I might be a good fit. And because I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is in the Denver area, which is the base for ANAW-USA, I think that, we thought that would be a good situation. So, but that was my experience. And, every step along the way, the team in Kenya was with us and guiding us along and helping us in our mission.
Well, we're so glad that you decided to join the board and that David pulled you along. Marianne, what about yourself?
So I actually got to get introduced to ANAW through the University of Nairobi while I was still a student. And I remember our dean, then Professor Mulay, he encouraged us to intern in different fields because going into vet school, all we think about is clinical work, but we never think about the other fields that are there. So, and in my fourth year, I interned with ANAW during my school holiday, and I met Joshua Tungonyo, the executive director, who mentored me. I like to say that my journey with ANAW is like from a toddler. I was a toddler in ANAW, and I grew up in ANAW. So I started off as an intern in my fourth year. I worked there, and it was a life-changing experience. And I was able to apply my knowledge and my skills that I learned in vet school to ANAW's mission of working with schools, communities, and governments to promote humane treatment of animals. And after vet school, I actually went back, this time round as a volunteer, and I volunteered there for a while. And then I became the project manager, and later on I was promoted as a programs manager. And working as a programs manager, I pioneered, Liz, you'll be interested to hear this. I actually pioneered the first spay-neuter program with VetTrex led by Dr. Lisa McCarthy. And the clinics offered free spay-neuter and rabies vaccinations, deworming, community sensitization to rural communities that were heavily burdened by rabies disease. And as part of giving back to the university, I worked with the then dean, Professor Minde, to bring in vet students for this clinic so that they can get the experience that I got and while I was still a student. Yeah.
I was in touch with Dr. McCarthy today, and she said to say hello to you, Marianne. And
thank you.
Yeah. But I think that's the fantastic thing about her program, and I'm really glad to know, your importance in getting that started is that, the whole idea is to try to make it sustainable in Kenya.
Yes.
And to teach the Kenyans what she's doing. And everything we only did with the supplies we could get in Kenya. Yeah. So we didn't bring in things that, you wouldn't be able to use in your type of practice. So I thought that was a really good way to bring in, what we do and not try to change the way things are done there.
Yeah. It's an awesome experience working with the VetTrex, and it's good to see that the program is still running. Even after the pandemic, this program will still run. And the idea is to equip the government vets and the private vets within these rural communities with the know-how of how to do the spay neuter campaigns. And what stands out about this particular project is that ANAW combines the spay neuter activities with the rabies campaign and also the community sensitization, which the community really needs for the vaccination campaigns to be sustainable. And after that, I got a call after I had left ANAW. I got a call to be on the board, which I was honored and I accepted.
Wonderful. That's quite an evolution through an organization, right? Intern, volunteer, programs manager, now on the board. It's quite remarkable. And I'm sure you just had such a hand in shaping all of their excellent work and the thought behind it and the intention to bring in communities and to create sustainable animal welfare programs. So, well, thank you both. That's I'm grateful that you're both involved with ANAW. I can say that. So I guess at this point, we can probably segue into our main topic, which is the different challenges facing veterinarians around the world and how compassion, knowledge, and husbandry for animals can make impacts on global conservation efforts. Now that seems very broad, but we will pick it apart through talking about different questions. So to start off, Liz, we know that you've been able to travel a lot while doing veterinary work, which I think is admirable. A lot of people would just retire and say, I'm done. I've put in my 34 years or however long it's been. But I was wondering, what are some of the most interesting differences you see in how veterinarians operate and are regarded in different cultures around the world?
Good question. And of course, realize that when I have gone on the trips, I'm kind of an interloper, and we're getting a brief glimpse of what is going on in the different communities. But to start with Mexico, which was the first time I went on this type of a trip, there the primary goal was to fight overpopulation. It's a huge problem. So I think the group I went with, called VIDAS, has a number of high volume spay neuter veterinarians, and we would do hundreds and hundreds of dogs while we were there for approximately a 6-day clinic. I think that we see different ways in the way we live with our animals. I think in Mexico, what I noticed is there were different levels of care, of course, and there were some that were cherished pets, but many of them were street dogs, and frankly, some were abused, and some were also just very ill because they had not had proper nutrition and proper deworming, those type of things. So I think a big part of the goal there was to elevate the situation of the animals and try to teach the communities as well. And the owners would be, or owners or rescues, because there were a lot of rescues that would bring in a lot of dogs. But they would stay by the side and try to find homes for the ones that were strays. And, we helped them out by providing some of the healthcare that they weren't either aware of or didn't have access to. So that was good. And in that case, it was also a sustainable program in that a number of Mexican veterinarians helped out with spay neuter. And then they're in such a good situation now where they've built a number of clinics and spay neuter operations that VIDAS has focused their attention elsewhere. And it did make an impact. And basically the folks in the Cancun area took off with their own programs, and they're, making a big dent in the overpopulation problem there. Puerto Rico was a situation where VIDAS partnered with HSUS and did a giant spayathon campaign where there were 7 clinics around the island and multiple tours. So I went twice, but they did a total of maybe 7 to 10 tours. And there was an example of post-natural disaster medicine, because Hurricane Maria had caused a lot of devastation and damage, and the pet population boomed because a number of people had to leave the island and they left their pets. and they were not able, to travel with them to wherever they ended up going. But it was another situation where infrastructure had been lost, and there weren't enough veterinarians on the island to be able to deal with the problem. And so I believe I know their goal was to spay and neuter, I believe, 10,000 animals, and I think they went way above that mark. So right now, Spayathon is on pause and is not happening. But again, they made a huge dent. That was not one where there were some Puerto Rico veterinarians involved, and actually a number of the veterinarians came from Mexico and a bunch from mainland U.S. And so it was a huge cooperative effort. And the teams that I went with FEDOS were 30 to 40 members, and they'd have 13 to 14 fast surgeons, and I was on the receiving end in recovery, so I've always done recovery. Yeah, and then the Rosebud Reservation, which I went to just a few weeks ago, was another experience, and I was very happy to do something, in my own country. And I think it was very interesting to see the difference in life, on a reservation versus where I live, for instance. They're in the process of trying to establish a veterinary clinic there and getting all the supplies to do that. They only have visiting veterinarians. There's actually a member of the tribe who is there all the time at the clinic, but they don't always have veterinarians. And so there was a good response, certainly not the huge numbers that we have at some clinics, but it was good to see, the tribe's investment in wanting to provide better care. And this was the first time we didn't have the owner involvement. It was more, quote, curbside, where they dropped off the animals, and we recovered them ourselves. But it was very good. It was very eye-opening, and I probably saw more ticks than I've ever seen in my life. and some of those were just on one dog. I mean, the dogs had hundreds and hundreds of ticks, and so it was a whole experience.
Wow. Well, that's amazing work.
Yeah. I really like being able to provide service and learn about the different communities. And in Kenya, I think the main thing I learned was that, and Dr. Kagai can clarify this, but it seemed that many of the veterinarians in their training were not necessarily focused on small animal medicine. I think that's what you practice now, so I'm interested to hear. But it seemed like many of the county veterinarians and students as well knew a lot more about farm and agriculture. And even though they may have been knowledgeable about small animal, it wasn't like the level of medicine and the mission to curb pet population was real high, on their agenda. Again, I just saw a very brief glimpse, one window of time into what happens there. So I'd be interested to see your experience as being in the private sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, Liz, you did such a good job of kind of painting these pictures of how cultural practices, but then also locations, and people often don't think about the impacts of natural disasters on animals and animal populations, both companion and wild. The heat wave right now up in the North Pacific and in Canada, I'm just thinking of all the animals up there. But all of these things kind of shape the care that animals receive and the role of veterinarians and how we understand our relationship to animals. So to get to Maryanne, I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about what Liz was referring to, the role of a veterinarian in Kenya for both agricultural and companion animals, and how that might differ from maybe what we understand a veterinarian is here in the United States.
Yeah, so generally the role of a vet here in Kenya, well, everywhere, is the vet is a healthcare provider, and by extension to human beings as well. Mm-hmm. And so the vet's job is to safeguard the health and the welfare of animals, as well as the health of the public. Now, in Kenya, vets work in diverse fields, and not just in private practice alone. You'll find that there are vets that are working in government, formulating policies or just advisors. You'll find there are vets that a good chunk of vets are working in private practice, and they're involved in diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of diseases. There are vets that are working in research work, working in the research institutions. And then there are other vets that work, they found their grounding in the NGO world, such as ANAW, and also charities such as the KSPCA. There are other vets that are working in the pharmaceutical industry, the animal feed manufacturing industry. There are some that are working in the Kenya Wildlife Service, and there are some that are teaching in learning institutions such as the universities and in the colleges. So the skills that vets get in Kenya enable them to work in diverse fields.
Okay, fascinating. So there's really quite a range, and it differs depending on where, probably also regionally, whether you're in an urban center or a rural. I'm sure that the role of the veterinarian can kind of shift as you go across the country. Well, that is a good place to ask you about what you each view as sort of the most important or even potentially the most challenging issues facing veterinarians in the United States, in Kenya, with regards to animal health and human health, really. Maybe, Liz, do you want to start us off and then we can get back to Kenya?
Sure. And I do want to echo what Dr. Maryanne said about, certainly there are a number of careers in veterinary medicine in the US as well, that would span governmental and industry, actually is kind of a big one, with research and development of new medications, tech support, those type of things. And of course, academia. And so we also have that, although it's because I've been a small animal practitioner, most of my career, I know a lot more about that sector. And I do think that when you tell somebody you're a veterinarian, they just automatically assume that you work in a practice. And so it's, it is one of those things where even myself, obviously, I've done a couple of different careers with industry and teaching. And there's a wide door and range of different types of careers within veterinary medicine as a profession. So challenge-wise, like I said, I can speak mostly to small animal veterinary medicine. But there are actually a lot of stressed out veterinarians in the U.S. I think that the pressures of small animal practice have changed, and this kind of gets into one of the other questions too. But the information explosion that we've all experienced, regardless of what area it has been, has affected vet med just like anything else. And there's so much to learn, so much to know, and our clients know more than they used to too. Of course, we always refer to Dr. Google, which we did not have in the mid-1980s. But oftentimes clients come armed with their diagnosis and, with a preconceived notion of what we need to do for their pet. And they don't always understand, what we're doing with our physical exams and our testing. And, that there's a lot of investigation involved in taking care of animals because whether they're wild animals or they're domestic animals, they don't tell us what's going on. So, but I think veterinary practice has changed immeasurably from the standpoint of the influx of corporate practices in the U.S. And I was just doing a little bit of research that I think there are over 3,000 corporate practices. So, about 10% of vet practices now, but about over 50% of the specialty practices. And that's another thing that has significantly changed with that explosion of information and research and all the new things that we need to know. That it has developed a number of specialties within the profession. So, just as with human medicine, we have ophthalmologists and neurologists and dermatologists and behavior folks and surgeons, and which is great because it's hard to be everything to every animal. And so there's a lot more referral going on. And in some ways, I hate to say it, but in some ways, defensive medicine from the standpoint of, more people are likely to sue you if you do something wrong. And so we're defensive in the point of, okay, I'm going to refer this pet to someone who is a specialist or knows more than I do. And you at least have to inform your client base that there are other options. Not everybody takes those options. But I do think, as with everything else, education is the core. And there are still a lot of uneducated pet owners that in vet med, at least in small animal and in large animal, we're doing our best to educate them on how best to care and to understand the services we provide. Oftentimes, they just come in because they haven't eaten in 10 days instead of, coming in because they're getting their wellness exam or that type of thing. But yeah, it's a challenging profession, lots of demand. And I don't know what the deal was with COVID, but everybody was sitting around watching their pets and decided they wanted to bring them all into the vet clinic. And so there's a bit of a shortage of veterinarians compared to, people have more wait times. It's harder to get appointments. And that's stressful because we work long hours and there's, a lot to be considered, a lot of compassion, fatigue and those type of things, because it is the type of profession that's all consuming, and we see wonderful happy moments with puppies, and we also see end of life, and so it can be difficult from that perspective, but very rewarding in my opinion.
Yeah, you really covered it. I was in the back of your clinic waiting for my mom to finish those long days, most of my childhood, right? Finishing records and the compassion fatigue and just how much you said it's all consuming. You give so much to the clients, but to the patients as well. And I just think it's a really incredible profession that certainly can't be reduced to Dr. Google. Marianne, I'm sure that maybe the challenges or the issues facing veterinarians and animals in Kenya are maybe a bit different. Maybe you can kind of paint that picture for us.
Actually, the issues cut across, as Liz has pointed them out. Issues to do with mental health, vets are stressed out. For Kenya, also, out of a population of 47 million, we only have a workforce of 3,000 registered vets and 10,000 vet paraprofessionals, or what we call technicians. Now, this means that we are short-staffed, Now you can imagine a good chunk of the vets are actually centered within the urban centers, and fewer of them are in the rural areas where the terrain, again, is a mess. So it's quite difficult for the vets to access and to offer the day-to-day health needs to animals. So in all honesty, here in Kenya, we are pretty underserved when it comes to vet services. And also another challenge that we face as veterinarians here in Kenya is lack of funding. And you will find that government will fund health, medical health, human health, but when it comes to veterinary health, animal health, it's a bit of a challenge there. And what most of the funding will actually go, the little funding that will be received, majority of it will go to food animals. But when it comes to work that has to do with companion animals, that one you'll find that the funding is absolutely not there, or it's just to work with what we have.
Yeah, and I wonder whether you think there's kind of a more of a prioritization being placed on the relationship between animal health and human health, both in food animals, but also in companion animals. And maybe that's a good point to transition to our next question, which is the importance of vaccination clinics, which I know, Dr. Kagai, Marianne, you've had a lot of experience working particularly in the areas of rabies vaccination efforts in Kenya, around the world. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about how you view the importance of that work.
Just to start off with, rabies is a highly fatal disease in humans and in animals. But interestingly, research has shown that the disease can be eliminated by simply doing vaccinations in our domestic dogs, because the domestic dog has been identified to maintain the cycle, the dog-mediated rabies cycle within the humans and animals. But unfortunately, for our domestic dogs, they've been misunderstood. And the narrative most of the time is that the easiest way to do away with rabies is to bait the dogs, to kill them, to remove them from the community as a way to eliminate the rabies burden, which in actual sense is not true. So Kenya actually launched a rabies elimination strategy involving a systematic approach of vaccinating 70% of our dog population consequently for 3 years. And organizations such as ANAW have partnered with the local government and have made great strides in doing such campaigns just to eliminate the disease. And ANAW's unique approach of combining the vaccination campaigns and the spay-neuter clinics. Remember, the spay-neuter clinics will help reduce the population of dogs to a manageable level, whereby now, if you have a manageable level and you can do the vaccinations, you can easily reach the 70% population. And also to bring in what is called responsible pet ownership community sensitization program, because a lot of people do not know about the vaccination, the need for vaccination. So that is the best way to combat the deadly disease, by approaching the disease in the three main ways, that is vaccination, spay-neuter, and doing the community sensitization on responsible pet ownership. And why I will emphasize on the responsible pet ownership is back then when I was working at ANAW, we actually pioneered the first census, dog census, because everyone was saying the narrative was that we are baiting dogs because we have too many stray dogs. So we needed to know how many dogs were in a community, a county called Machakos County, because it was one of the 5 identified as rabies burdened, and there was a lot of baiting that was being done. So we did a dog census to identify the number of dogs, and indeed they had a lot of dogs. We're talking about 250,000 dogs. And but what was interesting to note when we were doing the survey, we had a questionnaire. In the questionnaire, we had a question where we were asking whether the dogs were being confined or whether they were let loose, or what we are calling free roaming. And out of that study, we got the results that 60% plus of the dogs, owned dogs, are actually free roaming. And that is what has been classified as stray dogs. So those are not stray dogs. Those are owned dogs. And the best approach is to do responsible pet ownership, so that every pet owner is responsible for their dogs, so that they don't just roam about, because that roaming about is what spreads the disease.
Yeah. Well, that was an amazing initiative that you took. I think the dog census is such a great idea to kind of get a handle on what the scale of the issue is and how best to combat it. And I know Liz and I will be traveling this summer in almost exactly 1 month to support ANAW's rabies vaccination and community sensitization efforts. So hopefully, Marianne, we can meet up with you and get your insight on all of that work. And Liz, maybe you can talk about this as well, because I know you've been really involved in vaccination efforts and campaigns, and I'm just wondering, what do you see as the importance of this? Obviously, most animals in the United States will be vaccinated for rabies. Do you feel like this is an issue that doesn't pertain to the United States, or is it still something that we need to pay attention to here as well as abroad?
We definitely need to pay attention to it. And I could be wrong, but as far as I know, I believe Hawaii is our only rabies-free state. And so the reason that we don't have as much of a problem is because of vaccination. Mm-hmm. And, Marianne's absolutely right that it's a preventable disease, and Kenya is the only country that I personally have visited that has the number of deaths of humans from rabies. And so that certainly, my understanding is it's approximately 2,000 people per year. I don't know if that's, sounds like she's shaking her head, yes. In the US, it's very rare to have human rabies. However, we do now have terrestrial rabies in our wildlife. The primary hosts are bats have been, a problem for many years, and in Colorado was our primary vector for rabies. But now we're seeing skunks, raccoons, I believe fox can also get it. I mean, any mammal can contract rabies, but there are certain species that we see it a lot more frequently in. And so we are having more human exposure and more pet exposure. So luckily there are good guidelines in place for, when a bite occurs, whether your animal might get attacked by, a wild animal, then we decide if a pet's exposed, what kind of animal was that? What's the likelihood it would have rabies? Was there any human contact? That type of thing. And so because, we certainly have a lot of rural areas, but I would say most of them are close to urban centers. And there is awareness, although there's still the people who find the dead bat or find the bat that's acting sick and they flush it down the toilet instead of having it checked for rabies, or they accidentally expose themselves. And so we don't have near the problem, but it's still the problem. And, we do hear of travelers that may come, they actually were exposed in another country. Africa is one of the larger, continents where they've come back and, they didn't realize they had an exposure, and they die of rabies. So because it's such a severe disease, it's not one of those where you just get the flu and it goes away. Most people that contract rabies die. And so the preventability of it, as she's saying, and having mass vaccination campaigns is really the only key. But here, I would say more pets are either in and out of shelters or in their, pet life, with their owners. They are getting in for vaccinations. And there are a number of clinics who focus just on vaccines and wellness. And not every veterinary clinic likes that because they want to be able to see all the pets. But the honest truth is that they're serving a different community of pet owner, that is not necessarily seeking a super high level of care, but they at least are aware of the diseases that they could potentially contract, and they're at least getting them vaccinated. But there's still a problem, for the extent that cats and dogs are also getting rabies here, but not to the same extent.
Yeah. This might be a good time to talk about why it's so important that we begin connecting the dots between human, animal, and environmental health and welfare, how our treatment and our care of animals is linked to our own health and our own well-being. Marianne, maybe you can talk a little bit about this. And I know ANAW really tries to bring together, human, animal, and environmental health and its programs. And maybe you could talk a little bit about this and how you view the relationships here.
Yeah. So basically, when it comes to connecting the dots between human, animal, and environmental health, it is our responsibility as a human beings to ensure that the animals and the environment is kept healthy. It's not the animal to come and tell you I am sick because of this and this that you did. It's not the plants that will come and tell you that I'm sick because of this and this that you did. No, it's us, our responsibility as human beings to ensure that we maintain a healthy environment and our animals are healthy. Because if we don't do that, we lose as a human beings. We will lose. And I would like to echo the words of the late Nobel Prize winner, Professor Wangari Maathai, and I quote, "Mother Nature is very generous, but very unforgiving. If we destroy nature, nature will destroy us. If we are not careful and responsible enough, this will just be a practical during our lifetime." Mm-hmm. Profound words from the late Professor Wangari Maathai, but it's no other person's duty. It is our duty as human beings. Let's not even talk about policymakers. No. Let's talk about each and every human being. Each and every human being has a role to play to ensure that all that the ecosystem, the environment, the animals, the plant, the soil is kept healthy.
Beautifully put. It's amazing how that simple but profound truth eludes a lot of people who maybe have never realized how deeply our own health and well-being is interconnected with animals and the environment and the soil and everything that we can so easily take for granted. So thank you for sharing that. Liz, would you like to follow that?
I think that consumerism in the United States has a lot to do with perspective. And I think there are a lot of people who have no clue, how they're impacting the environment, how they're impacting, the animals and the people, really. I hate to say, I know there's a lot of focus on ourselves and some selfishness, and we want all these fancy things, and, we want all the cool stuff. And there's a lack of education to raise awareness on what our impact is. But I think, from the standpoint of the connecting the dots, the One Health philosophy has been slow to take hold in the United States, and that includes in the medical community and the veterinary community. I do think things like our pandemic of COVID-19 are helping to raise awareness, since there are some animal connections, with the spread of the big diseases that people, hear in the news, like the SARS and COVID and Ebola and those type of things. But in the general day-to-day, I don't think most people, unless they're just hugely environmentally conscious, most people aren't thinking about, how they're affecting everything. And most people aren't necessarily thinking about some of the conditions that we try to prevent in their pets could potentially be diseases for them, things like leptospirosis, those type of diseases. And just even knowing, from those smallest insects and ectoparasites like ticks and fleas and the things that they can carry, that can affect humans and animals, and trying to prevent those. But I do think there's certainly more awareness than there used to be, and it's a slow process. I love the younger generation of Katie and Ryan and some of the people who are up and coming and their consciousness. There are so many more young people that are thinking about the impact of whether it be livestock raising or production, or just plant-based, diets versus meat diets, a number of things that I think they're much more environmentally conscious. And a lot of that is because it is more in our faces than it used to be, but not everybody pays attention to it. But even in the medical community, they don't always think of veterinarians as a partner. I think they think of us more as just, the ones that take care of the animals, and they take care of the people. And so hopefully, as time goes on, we're going to see more and more people that really start to get it. And I'd say even as a veterinarian, I didn't get it that much, until like more recent years. And when I've done some experience, overseas and in different countries. But overall, the dots are there and they connect themselves whether we do or not. So
yes, I know. Exactly. Yeah. Just hope we can keep up, and that consciousness shift happens on pace with the kinds of challenges that we're facing and the kind of time crunch that we're in. I think that's the thing that concerns me the most is whether or not we'll be able to get our act together in time. I really feel like Africa can lead the West. Some of these dots seem to be better connected in non-Western contexts. Certainly a lot of the work I've done in Nepal and India and elsewhere, it's just obvious. And it's much more apparent that people are living more grounded in that reality, that their health is caught up in the health of every natural system around them. Marianne, if you'd like to speak to that, you're more than welcome to. And then we'll try to close with a cheerier subject.
I think just to add on to what you said, Kate, with our culture, we actually started connecting the dots a long time ago. Our grandparents, our parents, they didn't know much about fast foods. It was about getting food from the ground and from the soil. And they knew very well, if the soil is not healthy, there's no way I'm going to get food. And they didn't use the processed chemicals that are being used right now. They would use the traditional methods, using fertilizer from the cow and putting it in the soil to fertilize, to get food for the cows and for themselves. So there was that. Already the dots were actually connected in our culture, in our background, through our fathers and our grandfathers. But at some point, there's somewhere that is shifting. And we need to go back to that. As Liz mentioned, we're becoming more selfish. It's not about the soil. We want to make more money. We're processing chemicals that, in actual sense, are only working for a short period and not for the long-term period. So, we need to go back to that.
Yeah, very well put. I've always seen veterinary medicine as a very generous profession, a very kind of selfless profession. And so I think it would be great if we could close by having each of you maybe tell us what you most love about being a veterinarian. Liz and then Marianne.
In my case, I guess I've always gotten, that piece of the human-animal bond and connection. And I think a lot of people go into veterinary medicine thinking they just deal with animals, and then they realize, oh boy, I don't just deal with animals. I deal with the people that are associated with the animals. And so I hate to say it, but I do know some veterinarians who have loved having curbside medicine during the pandemic where the owners aren't coming into the building, but they still have to talk to them on the phone. And it's kind of sad because, we do play a role as an educator. But I think, in my case, of course, I feel like I have a connection with animals and I can kind of, steer people in the right direction. I've had the good fortune of being in practices and educational settings and corporate settings where the level of education has been pretty high, honestly. We certainly have the clients that don't have a clue, but most of the clients I have worked with in small animal medicine are fairly well educated and they love their animals. And, just seeing the impact that those bonds have in their lives. I know a lot of people who, their pet may be their best friend and the most important creature in their life, whether that's human or animal. And as they say, our pets are the family we can choose.
Exactly.
Our regular family, we don't get to choose. And we also don't live with them every day, 24 hours a day, like we do with our pets. And so I think just trying to foster the human-animal bond and educate people about why we want to care for them is my main reason. And just liking to play around with dogs and cats. And I dabble in exotic pets like my turtles, and Ryan has a snake and things like that we also bond with, in a different way. But anyway, I think just trying to support that and then trying to support, the causes I'm passionate about with helping eradicate rabies and helping decrease the pet overpopulation problem. So it's great to be in a position that you can make a difference.
Yeah, well, you've certainly picked the right profession. Marianne?
I think my childhood really nurtured me a lot. Played a part in me being a vet, and what I love most, and from back then till now, when I talked about Casper and how he was in pain, and I helped him through that pain to heal and to get better. I've always appreciated and I've always loved the fact that I can actually intervene when an animal is in pain to alleviate that pain and that suffering. And I also love the fact that for vets, we have very particular, it's like we communicate with sorry, I almost said dogs. Yes, I love dogs. Yeah, we communicate with animals, different types of animals. You guys talked about horses. For me, it was mostly for the dogs. And just getting to have that one-on-one, somewhat communication with animals and understanding them and interpreting what they are saying or what they are not saying. I'll give you an example. My husband, when we actually got married, he just didn't understand my connection with animals. And I have a cat, and by default, the cat moved in with us. And he didn't understand the connection. And right now, the cat prefers more of him than to me. they formed this bond. They formed this bond that is so strong, and I admire that bond. And the fact that I influenced that on him is rewarding.
No, that's beautiful. Marianne, my husband's the same way. He thought he was allergic to cats, and now my cats follow him around everywhere he goes. And but I love that. I think veterinarians as healers, and you get to have that kind of special connection with animals to alleviate pain and suffering. Well, I want to thank you both. Any final comments before I close?
I don't think so, other than I'm looking forward to coming to Kenya. And I hope I get to work alongside Dr. Maryanne if she's not too busy.
Yeah, me too.
In the clinic, yes. And I'm very excited to bring my husband and son, neither one has done a service trip with me. We've done a lot of traveling, but not in a service capacity. So
we're so looking forward to coming, Marianne. I really hope we'll get to work alongside you.
Yes, thank you so very much for this opportunity, Katherine, Liz, and Brian, to know you guys better. I look forward to you guys coming to Kenya.
Before I close, I just really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank Liz and Marianne, doctors Liz and Marianne, for their insights and for all the care and compassion that they've shown to animals and people throughout their lives and careers. So thanks so much to you both. If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to learn about or support our work, you can visit www.ANAW-USA.org. Thanks so much for listening.